If you asked me a year ago what Ys was, I would have said, oh, it's those unplayed games I've got at the end of my Vita collection. But there's actually more to it than that. Contrary to what video game YouTubers insist, the late 1980s video game scene wasn't just limited to Nintendo and to a lesser degree Sega. There were actually these things called home computers, and they were booming across the globe. Japan in particular was a market where this was very much true. This video subject, Ys, may have had a Famicom release and then even a Master System 1-2 later, but for the first year of its release, you'd need a home computer just to play it. Specifically a PC-88, or an X1, or a PC-98, an FM7, or the MSX2. There were so many computers back then, each with their own versions of Ys. This whole era of radically different home computers with their own unique game libraries is behind us now, but to many this was the norm. And in our American-centric view of gaming on YouTube, it's easily dismissed as just weird tidbits. Though I should at least plug that some games on these old computers are available now on Nintendo Switch. I love you, Egg Console, thank you for preserving these classics even if no one else buys them. But to give a very quick rundown of this constant cycle of remakes that led me to what I'm going to be talking about shortly, Ys 1 released for numerous platforms starting in 1987, and its sequel saw release the following year. Among the many slightly different versions of these games was the spectacular remake just a year later in 1989 for Japan's PC Engine CD, then later TurboGrafx CD internationally. This remake was a substantial overhaul, and it even combined both games into a single disc. For a decade, this was seen as the bee's knees to everyone who still said that phrase. But then in 2001, the world was shook by something they'll never forget. Ys 1 and 2's combination release got an even more substantial remake for PC. And not to poo-poo the historical importance of the original million releases and the earlier remake, but this 25-year-old release just won't die, despite a failed attempt to do so. This saw a re-release again for PlayStation 2 in 2003, and then in 2009 it came to the PSP, bringing all this portably. In the distant time of a little bit later in 2009, it came to PC again? Yeah, 8 years later and the PC version got replaced by a near identical version. And this most recent PC release is still the version that most people will be playing. It's in wide distribution, and it is basically what Ys 1 and 2 are to most people that play it now. The PlayStation Portable version is just more of the same, with neither the originality of the 2001 release or the persistence of the 2009 one. Portability and me being a weird obsessive are the only reason it's even a little relevant today. And that goes extra hard for the release I skimmed over. 2008 saw Ys 1 and 2 remade for DS, a version that upset many a fan and was quickly forgotten. That's a bit grim. I don't think it's worthless or anything, but I'd be hard pressed to recommend it to anyone. That sounds worse than it is. The game's not bad, it's just lesser in like every single way due to a myriad of reasons. It's the Diddy Kong Racing DS of the Ys family. It's good in a vacuum, just don't have it compared to anything else. For an English-speaking perspective, Ys on DS wasn't all doom and gloom. The series didn't have a lot of English releases by that time, especially for Ys 2, which was still limited to TurboGrafx and the Wii Virtual Console. So it did fill a niche somewhat, even if the Virtual Console release was right there just outshining it. Regardless of a specific version you're playing, these remakes both share the same opening sequence. Red-headed swordsman Adol Christian wakes up in bandages as he's being tended to by a doctor in a small coastal town after washing ashore, thanks to a storm interrupting his sailing voyage. Thankfully, he's on the island he set sail for, so it wasn't all that bad, and within no time, resumes his original quest to thwart the evil that has taken root. This has him talking to lots of specific people, making townspeople happy, and most importantly, grinding for experience. These Ys games are very grindy, And while that may not sound like your thing, combat is so simplistic and quick that it doesn't drag the game down at all. Welcome to the iconic bump system. Walk into an enemy and you automatically deal damage, and depending on your positioning, you may receive some too. Action RPGs of this era were still figuring out that whole combat thing, and compared to Hydlide with its iconic attack and defense stances, Ys is really robust. And don't take this as an attack on Hydlide, I buy that game a lot for a reason. It just makes my brain feel good, I don't know why. But this is just to say, we were many years away from Terranigma and its perfected combat system for action RPGs. Hell, we were even a few years away from Secret of Mana and its very serviceable combat. But by being so bare bones here, I find it a lot more fun than combat from that latter example. Oh, I don't think that'll make people happy. Sorry, I prefer Ys to Secret of Mana. Look, if this is your first video of mine, you should know that no one takes anything I say seriously. The bumping around makes all fights feel fast and frenetic. It's less a simulation of what the characters are doing, and more of an approximation that your imagination fills in the gaps for. The depth isn't about button timing, it's about positioning and angles. However, this is where the DS version falters, and to some this is a deal breaker, though I wouldn't go that far personally. You see, the only way to access the bump system is to play this game exclusively through the touchscreen. Move the stylus to guide ADOL everywhere. It's serviceable, but why try to fix what wasn't broken? We have this D-pad that's right here ready for movement, and guess what? You can play the game like that, but if you dare do so, the bump system is removed. You have to manually swing your sword each time. From an outsider's perspective, you're probably thinking, so what? It's like most action RPGs. The problems are numerous though. The sword has a very short range, and it's incredibly easy to just cheese an enemy by doing this, pushing them back and repeat. You will never get damaged if you do that well enough. But if you move while attacking, you're likely just to hurt yourself a bunch because of the way combat's been redone. And most importantly, the bosses of Ys were basically designed around bumping. Despite trying to liven up the combat, Ys feels a lot more mind-numbing with this bland, repetitive button pressing that I have to hammer away at. And unlike the many Ys sequels which include more traditional, non-bumping combat, they have a slew of extra mechanics to make them very fun. But for Ys 1, all you have is your sword attack. That's it. In its defense, Ys 2 does fare better on DS, due to the constant use of magic, but I'm getting ahead of myself. But in this first Ys game specifically, the quest is very straightforward and there are very few locations. You're strung along with very helpful dialogue, so you shouldn't get lost, but the DS version is foolproof because now we have constant on-screen reminders telling you where to go, and the game won't even let you go to later sections early on and die horribly. You're not permitted to go there until the game says you're ready to. This island of Asteria has had a recent influx of monsters, and it's up to us as RPG protagonists to put an end to all this and restore peace and stuff to the world. Even if the dreaded man with a dark cape is always one step ahead of ADOL, and doing the worst crimes imaginable, like kidnapping or stealing someone's musical instrument. Throughout this we have 3 towns and just as many dungeons. Each serves their exact purpose without overstaying their appeal. And for the dungeons themselves in this first game, I love how they all feel really different from each other. We have a shrine filled with tight corridors and rooms leading nowhere, which we explore by repeatedly diving into the depths thanks to the ample amount of staircases provided. We have the dark mines, which are a lot wider and has significantly fewer changes in elevation. And then we end with Dam Tower, which kind of inverts the shrine by being something we climb up instead, though this one really shows off the sense of scale with the many exterior shots, and expertly portrays just how far we've come. Especially because Dam Tower is a place we can see earlier in the game as this distant looming presence. The game builds up to this climax wonderfully, and the visuals in these remakes bring the world to life so well. As you can no doubt imagine, this is a game of constant quests to fetch items for people until you're powerful enough to take on the big bad guy. But the writing here helps it to feel like a lot more than just that. Well, this is an 80s RPG, so let's not get carried away. But story-wise, while it is a little bare, the dialogue and especially the lore elevate this a lot above its contemporaries. Some of that is lost when we're playing this from the perspective of 2000s era remakes, and especially when played today, but if you can go into this with historical context, there is a lot to appreciate. And the beauty of the story is, this is a proper duology, where the second game builds off the first ones, so we get something a lot more entertaining if viewed as a single long package. In fact, the PC Engine release did exactly that, where we go straight from Ys 1 to 2, as if it is one long game. These remakes have a menu so you can just play whichever game you like, which is undoubtedly a much more convenient feature, especially for replays. But it does feel a little wrong to me not to play both games back to back. Even though these are two wildly different experiences at the end of the day, despite looking so similar. It's a tale as old as time. Make a really simple first game that people adore, then make a sequel that adds even more to it and should be universally more beloved, but the game is kind of dragged down by its new size and confusing directions. Dragon Quest did it. Fallout did it. Banjo-Kazooie did it. And usually whenever this happens, I know exactly where I land on preferences, even if it is a little inconsistent. For example, I'd gladly take Fallout 1 for its consistency, but I adore Banjo-Tooie for its scope and complexity. Depending on the day, my preferences will switch, and I will do it dramatically. These games are kind of equal to me when I think about it in a general sense. And this does kind of sound backhanded because Ys 2 does so much to make it the better game, but it also does have one major fault. Ys 1 was so tightly focused that it was nearly impossible to get lost or confused. I said the word nearly because I still get tripped up in the mines. Well, Ys 2 is a getting lost simulator. Everything looks the same in the dungeons, and there's just sprawling labyrinths. I worry this comes across as hyperbole, but this is a well-known feature, so well known that when I was looking up a GIF for Ys 2 to post online, the first result I got was a joke about someone being lost in a maze. Some dungeons are easier than others to navigate, but Salmon Shrine is the exact point every playthrough where I tell myself, nah, this game's actually worse than the first one. And it's what sticks in my head all the time whenever my brain argues with itself about the quality of these two games. It sucks to think this because Ys 2 does so much right. When everything clicks, this is a phenomenal game. The bump combat has been modified with a projectile fireball, which we can even charge up to obliterate enemies. And this doesn't just add a lot more combat depth without sacrificing the original's charm. It changes bosses and turns them into these spectacular bullet hells, where we have to retaliate by spamming fire back. And the first game had good bosses too. I just prefer this approach where we're not in the splash zone. Especially in regards to the DS version where mashing the attack button on giant bosses isn't fun. My hands hurt, but that's also a given because I'm in my 30s. To get back to the DS version, it does have a lot to call its own. It adds an extra mediocre dungeon to the first game where you get new equipment, and the game isn't really balanced around this new equipment, so that's something. And the level cap has been raised in the first game as well, which I don't really have a strong opinion on. But to be more positive, its graphics hit that sweet spot in my heart. I know everyone else prefers the PSP visuals. They're the Ys standard for over 20 years now. But the DS version, with its 3D models for the environment, while still using 2D pixel art for characters and enemies, this is my jam. Granted, this is on the uglier side of that particular style, but I always adore when games look this kind of way. And I will defend Ys on DS to the death for this alone. Unfortunately, it doesn't really play around with cameras enough. This is still largely the same collection of angles that we got in the other versions, but hey, it's nice. And the credits, they mess around with this a lot, which I know isn't really the game, but hey, it kept me watching the credits, so good for you, mediocre DS remake, you've got the best credits I've seen out of Ys 1 and 2. Though the visuals do unfortunately commit a crime beyond being distasteful to a lot of normal people. Things are far too zoomed in here. It's helped a little by the bottom screen always being a map, but even that map isn't a big help because it's still zoomed in. It's very common for enemies to kind of just appear out of nowhere when you're running, and this doesn't go well with a game that replaced auto attacks with manual ones. Basically always on edge whenever you're moving. During boss fights, however, The game does zoom out, which is a godsend, but it does make me wonder why the rest of the game just couldn't do this. If you haven't understood by now, don't go for the DS version unless you're a DS mega fan like me. Sony's release is much more definitive if we're just talking about these two releases. Gives us multiple options for music or character portraits. We get these new PSP renditions, or the older PC art from nearly a decade prior, and both work quite well, I like them. In fact, with music, we can not only choose for two different versions, you also get the PC-88 music if you're into that. They really cared about bringing this game to life on PSP. They even redid the HUD of the PC version to fit better across the screen. The way East is normally presented has a giant HUD, and if they just copy that over here, you'd basically be playing with half the screen space. If they did that on PSP, you wouldn't see the game very well. They managed to bring in all the essential information, but with a clean, minimal format. It reminds me of those old shooters where you had two different HUD options. When we're focusing on these two releases as well, the PSP one has a glut of options. It lets us switch between 8-way movement or full 360-degree movement, which is probably less efficient, but I like my slippery doll missing every door until he rubs his face against a wall enough. We can also turn on wall transparency so we can see ourselves behind walls, something the DS version desperately needed. Sorry to badmouth the dual screen release even more. It was very common to walk into enemies we couldn't see because of the 3D environments blocking our view. Sorry, lesser version, I still really like you. I'm just easily annoyed as well. That kind of feeling is also how I feel during the second game's dungeons. I do still like them, even if I get annoyed because they're all mazes that I get lost in repeatedly. But there's more that appeals to me. For starters, having a snow and ice dungeon is an easy way to win me over. And, on the other side of things I love, we get a volcanic cave. The game is firing on all cylinders, they're appealing to me perfectly. They're both so pleasing that I'll even forgive the fact that we have a mine again, which was one of the very few dungeons from the first game. Besides, the execution of both these mines is radically different, with this one focusing more on you going up and down a series of stairs. And later on we get to Salmon Shrine, which is the biggest clusterfuck of a map. I hate it so much, but I still love it, it's really fun. Because what you have to do in all these dungeons kept me thoroughly entertained all the way through the game. Especially in Salmon, where all the mechanics combine into a real test of everything we've learnt thus far, and it uses the story better than any other locale across this duology. East 2 in general is a significant step up from the first when it comes to implementing story into the action. There's less stop and start here. It actually feels like the big bad is doing stuff even while we're trying to undo it. In regards to what we're asked to do in these dungeons, I've already talked about the fun of shooting fireballs, but our magic goes far beyond that. Other uses of magic include fast travel, which is a godsend in this game. It's not really much to say except that it helps to alleviate getting lost all the time. But more importantly, a doll can use magic to transform himself into a Roo, which is a friendly little monster that doesn't do much. But with this, you can stealth past enemy guards and get into places a doll can't. And more humorously, we can use it to talk to all the other monsters and have some fun banter. This transformation kind of makes East 2 for me. It opens up the depth a lot more, and combined with the multitude of items that you get here, it makes the world feel like a reactive place with a sense of logic. By 80s RPG standards, let's not get carried away. And this is all turned on its head later on, when you're cursed to be a Roo against your will, meaning humans can't understand you anymore, and we have to find a solution to get a doll back to normal, so we can bump enemies to death again. This is almost enough to make me forgive that every dungeon here is like finding a needle in a haystack. Do you get why I'm conflicted here? I don't know how to feel about these games, because I love them, they're great. Even the inferior DS version, I loved playing all 4 versions of these games that I had to play for this video. But you know, there's so many nitpicks that just eat away at me. It's easier when I'm head over heels in love with the game. Whereas here we have one that I find a bit too basic, and another I find a bit too obtuse. I need a Goldilocks game in the middle, and I'm sure everyone will recommend what East game I should be playing instead to appeal to my tastes. But I'm not going to do that. Because next up, I'm looking at Aliens Infestation, a 2011 search action sister game to Aliens Colonial Marines. Remember that game, the one that everyone hated? Well, while that was being developed, WayForward delivered my favourite game in this series that is sometimes known for occasionally good games between train wrecks. And if for some reason you need to listen to me talk about other things, I now have a podcast where I talk about old anthology shows. Who am I kidding? No one's watched this far into the video.